prioritize self-care in your life and what that looks like for you. I would think that this has had to be a different journey through different parts of your life. I mean, you've done everything from work on Wall Street to be a preschool teacher and everything in between. So talk to me about self-care as these different roles have come up, as you've been a partner, as you've been a mom, a coach, all these things. Talk to me about that.
Sure. So I think self-care, like so many things in life, you either do it or you're forced to do it, right? Get to a place where you don't have a choice but to do it. And for a long time, I would allow myself to get to that place where I had no choice but to do it because I just didn't. It was always running or doing something for somebody else, even when I was young. But I think like at some point you get when you no longer have the power to make the decisions are made for you. Maybe it's a health issue, maybe it's a psych issue, something. And, that was my story. So I feel like when my kids were young, and I'll tell you, like from when I was more consciously taking care of myself, right?
Yeah.
So my kids were young and I was always the girl at the back of the gym smoking pot. Like I was not your athlete at all.
Wow, that really changed.
Oh yeah, definitely. But it was because I had my kids and I realized that if I wanted to be the mom that I wanted to be, I couldn't have the self-care, the health that I had. So that's when I started running.
Okay.
And from running, I ran a 5K in my neighborhood. And you would have thought that I won an Olympic medal because I was like, oh my God, like me? I ran a 5K? Like I'm, like that's crazy. And if I can run a 5K, well, what else can I do? And that started my journey into fitness. And I feel like what eventually happened is that fitness became my self-care. So I started doing things that were longer and longer and longer. So I've run marathons. I've done Ironman triathlons. I've done 3 Ironmans.
Wow.
And you can't fake it, right? Like you have to train. You have to train for those things. But because I had to train for those things, I had to carve out the time for me. And and I don't even think I was doing it consciously at the time, but looking back, I was like, oh, that's how I took care of myself. That's how I created that space between me. And, I had 2 young boys. They're 20 months apart. I was a preschool teacher. They were in school with me. It was through that fitness that I created that self-care and that space for myself. Yeah. And then that became kind of a practice and it became something that I need because like once you do that, it's like once you're a pickle, you can't go back to being a cucumber, right?
Yeah. So you get to a point where your body is just like, nope, we can't do that anymore. But then you realize there was a need. Like this is something that I needed to continue in some fashion.
Right. And I process through movement. I'm not one of those people that, I meditate all the time and I love going to La La Land in my dreams, all of that stuff. But if any emotion, like if I go for a walk, if I go for a run, if I go for a hike, if I go snowboarding, that's when I'm like, oh, so.
Yeah, I relate to that. I ran for a long time, ran half marathons in my 30s when my kids were little. And I understand that, like, you don't just walk up to the starting line and do one of those things. I mean, it's not an Ironman, but 13 miles is not 5.
Right.
You don't fake your way through it. So I understand that getting out there and now I walk because my hips after years of running just said no more. So I do a lot of vigorous walking and HIIT workouts and cardio kind of things. But I totally understand that getting out and clearing your mind and just kind of that release. And even though for years, it's probably what kept me kind of alive and going and as healthy as I was, because I wasn't really doing anything with the emotional side, but I was at least getting out there and doing the bodily release, clearing my head and making space for new ideas, new things, things to do. So I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many blog posts I have written on my bike, or speeches, because for some reason it was like whatever. So it's my creative time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Talk to me about taking care of your emotional health as much as your physical health. I'm going to do this first, and then we'll go into boundaries, because I think this really makes sense from what we're talking about. So you talk about, you basically like would write a blog on on a bike.
Mhm.
So I think you can really see where that tie between emotional and physical ties in and comes together. Talk to me about your journey with that.
Yeah. So I do believe that they have to coincide, because you can't, your body has to sustain that confidence, or it has to sustain you in your emotional journey. But you have to also have that emotional kind of like caring enough and esteem enough about yourself in order to take care of your body.
Sure.
And and it's not always happening, and
No.
sometimes, so it becomes very deliberate, it's like I have to, I have to move my body so that my head is clear. I have to clear my head so that I can move my body, so that when one of those things isn't quite on the forefront of my, like, I really don't feel like doing anything today, I can go back to that cycle and understand that and be like, oh, so this is what's going on. Like right now I need my head to come in stronger than my body, or right now I need my body to start itching so that my head comes along to the party,
Yes, absolutely. Bringing those things together, because it's all one unit, and sometimes we pull it out and separate it. And I think that it's so important to bring that and see that connection, and that bringing that together. Confidently setting boundaries. Let's go into boundaries, because you have a lot of asks, I'm sure, of you and your time. So talk to me about your journey with boundaries. Is that something you've always understood that you needed, or is that something you had to work into? Because you talked about earlier, in self-care, sometimes we don't do it till we have to. We as women are just conditioned to show up for everybody else first. And so we do. Unfortunately, I have this conversation time and time again with people, that we hit this wall before it gets our attention. And then it's like, oh, maybe I need some self-care. Maybe I need some boundaries. Has that been your experience too?
100%. I mean, like, if you look at the dictionary for people pleaser, my name would be right next to it. Like, zero boundaries. And but I was raised that way, like if I ever, and I love my parents. They're both deceased. They've done the best. I have no issues with them at all. But in my house, like, if I said I want this, or I don't want to do this for you, you were selfish.
Yeah.
All right. It's like, oh my God, you're so selfish. And that was something really hard to let go of. But you do adult, and you do grow up, and hopefully you're not acting from the same way as you were as a kid. And it was, when I left my house and I started, okay, well, I need to, my relationships with partners, and then until I got married and with my kids, it was hard to create that boundary without feeling selfish, because that's the only thing that I knew.
Right.
But luckily for me, my husband, my late husband, was incredible in allowing me the space to. It's like, no, you go train, like, you go do this. You want to start a business, you go for it, And he's the one that helped me put the boundaries, because he allowed me space. And then once I got the taste of it, it's like, oh my gosh, like, I can do this, and nobody's good. Like, the world's not going to end if I don't show up. Like, really? That's amazing. It's very humbling to know that, like, everybody's going to be just fine without you.
It is.
Right?
It's simultaneoally humbling and empowering at the same time. It's like,
exactly.
Yes, I can do this. And like, oh, I maybe am not the one that saves the world every day. That's
exactly.
Okay,
and that's okay. So I think, like, coming to that realization, then it made it easier to start setting those boundaries. And the hardest ones are obviously with my kids, because and especially my husband passed away, and so, like, I'm a single mom, and it's like my life is about them. So those are the hardest boundaries to set. But at the same time, and I teach this all the time, like, if you don't give permission to yourself to follow your dreams and to follow your things, you're going to take it out on the people that you love the most.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. You can't show up as your best self if you're not taking care of yourself to be your best self.
Right. And so for moms, like, and, I'm a mom and I work a lot with moms. It's, it's like this, like, I don't know, your kid likes soccer and he has like, in kindergarten or in first grade, they score a goal and the coach says like, wow, he's really good. And then in your head is like, soccer. Like that is going to be my college scholarship, right? And it's soccer, soccer, soccer. And then you start, and you start controlling that child. And you start like, so what soccer teams does he belong to? Who are his friends? What birthday parties do they go to? Blah, 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 summer camp. And because you denied yourself your path and your dreams, and you're doing all of this for them, you don't allow them to be them either.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm like shaking my head vigorously because I understand that experience as a parent so intuitively. Like, yes. And we stop even asking them. Mm-hmm. Until one day they come in crying. I don't want to go soccer.
Right. Yeah. And then you lose your shit. Like, sorry.
You do. No, you do. You're like, what do you mean?
What do you mean? Like, do you know what I've had to do in order for you to go to soccer? Like, do you know the sacrifices that I had to make? Or like you're driving to, like I have to go to work that I don't like so that I can have the money that I don't like so that I can pay for it. Like, no, you cannot switch soccer. And is that the kind of mom that you want to be? Probably none of us want to do that, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't put the boundaries, you, again, like the ones that pay the consequences are exactly the people that you're trying to please the most.
Yes. And it becomes, I think, too, I have a great example of this. My brother is much younger than me. He's 16 years younger than me. So his kids are like in early elementary age. Mm-hmm. And his son is third grade and, involved in a lot of different things and a really good little baseball player, but decided this year, and my brother was a very good baseball player. He had a college scholarship, all that, but just went to dad and just said, I don't really want to play baseball this year. I just think it's kind of boring. I'd rather stick with these other things. And he's doing other sports too and activities. And these other things are more fun and more exciting for me. And so he's like, all right, buddy. And the parent group and the coaching association, because my brother was a coach with these age groups, flipped out. You can't let him do that. You can't let him stop playing. Like, he's 9 and he doesn't want to do this anymore. And I'm going to listen to him because he came up with kind of the same experience that we talked about. And, but it was so interesting. I'm like, his buddies were his buddies, but the parental and coaching association response about this 9-year-old was and so eye-opening to me. And I think that happens so much of like, I was guilty of it myself. And, looking back now, it's, but also knowing too, it's like, okay, well, we've learned from that. We're better for that. And we're talking about it now. And that's why we're having these conversations. But, those boundaries too, and allowing our kids to express their own boundaries. It's not just about our boundaries. It's about listening to what they say.
Exactly.
And they don't know to call it a boundary, but that's what it is.
Yeah. And how empowering for them to be able to set those boundaries and to learn, because sometimes it's uncomfortable, right? Sure. Like you have to have like the parent associate, with the coaching, like you said. But if you imagine how empowered that 9-year-old is going to be to say, is like, no, when you really want something, you stick up for it. Like you don't let other people infringe upon your dream just because maybe it's more polite, but it's not even polite, Or
you're even just scared to say it. Because I remember, my nephew was kind of nervous to share this. He didn't know what my brother's response was going to be. And he's like, are you mad, Dad? Are you just, he's like, no, buddy, what are you going to do? But I mean, that's kind of the framework and the culture that these, kind of set up to believe. So yeah, I'm so glad you addressed that. I think that is really, really important. Did that help prompt your work with kids? Because you work with kids, you work with moms, you have this whole program that's nationwide. Did that prompt that?
No, I think that like came out of that, like that
Okay.
learning, right?
Okay.
Because I help moms start a business, and it's a kids fitness business. So I was, at first I was doing all the sales calls, and I would talk to a mom, and like she was perfect, and like it's what she wanted to do, but that's
Yeah.
like that last foot, she wouldn't do it because, well, my kid needs braces or whatever it is. So she denied herself of something that she wanted to do that would be good for her, that would bring her income, that would empower her kids and her community. And she would not do any of that because she didn't give herself permission to do it. And that's when I started exploring that a little bit. And I was like, wow. And I mean, I'm guilty. I've been guilty of it too. Like you have too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But then like, again, like, then I'm like, oh my gosh, when I didn't do that, like it goes right back and it's my kid, my kid pays the price for it. The people that you want to protect in the first place. So
yeah,
that came a little bit after the fact.
Okay. Very interesting. Yeah. It's so interesting how that's all connected. I'm so glad that we talked about that, and what you brought up within that's so powerful. And I think it's like, and parents, don't sit there and beat yourselves up. We've all been there.
Absolutely.
And learn from it. And it's like, oh, okay, let's sit with this and see where this is coming from. So, because it's just an opportunity. Again, those hard things, good, bad, it's all part of the life experience. Yeah. We're all learning as we go.
Yeah. And I would say that if you're sitting out there and you're listening and you're getting all bent out of shape, or like really resistant to this, that's exactly means that this is something that you need to think about.
Yep.
Right? Because otherwise it wouldn't bother you in the least bit. If it's bothering you for any reason, it's because it's something that that you need to look into. And I invite you to do that without blame, shame, judgment, nothing. It's just, oh, well, I can learn here, and don't we all want to learn?
It's, it's sitting with that discomfort, which, you've got a whole book about that.
Yeah. So, I was like, I wrote a book on that.
Exactly. So it's so important because it's getting your attention. It's there for a reason. Yeah. Absolutely. And this goes nicely into this because your work does this so well, how we can support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically. You've done that in different ways throughout your life, but talk to me about your journey with that.
Yeah, I think that you can't give anybody else permission to do anything until you give yourself permission, right? Until you start living unapologetically, because if you encourage other people to do something that you don't do, there's something to be said, like, be better than I am. Awesome.
Right.
But I think like it starts with you and with giving yourself permission to take risks and to take chances. And when you do that, it's like, when you find, I don't know, a face cream or a restaurant that you love, and you're like, oh my God, everybody needs to know about this. And you're like, and you have to try this face because, or you have to go to this restaurant, and you go, and like, that's the same thing with this empowerment of other women. It's like, once you have a taste of it for yourself and you realize, oh my gosh, this is so 100% possible. It's like you want other people to experience what you have experienced. And I think that's how I came to it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think, just modeling it gives permission too. It gives permission if other people are feeling tentative about it. I love that. Such a great example. And you just want to bring everybody on the journey with you. It's like, we can do this. It's possible. The importance of setting and coming back to your why and your values in everything you do. You talked about early on, you live from a place of integrity. Talk to me how about that informs your paths and your choices and things you choose to do and not do. Because I'm sure there's times where you have to be like, no, that doesn't align with what I'm doing here.
100%. And that's why integrity makes it so easy, right?
Yeah,
because it's this internal compass that it's kind of black and white. When it's gray, it's just because you don't want to really listen to what it really is. At least that's my experience.
No, I think that's so true. That's so true. Again, we get squirmy about that. But absolutely. I think that's really important. I think this is going to be really interesting too. Living out of your own expectations versus others' expectations. I can see so many places from looking into your background where this probably came up in your life. You've lived internationally. You were born in Brazil. To Cuban parents. You've lived in Chile. You've lived in in Morocco. Is that where you were in Africa? Now you're in the United States. So probably just expectations within that. And have you bounced around? You've been on Wall Street. You've been in Silicon Valley. But then were at home with your kids and you started teaching preschool. And then your husband tragically passed away a few years ago and made a choice within that was probably really hard to live with. And you had to live that out in the way that felt most authentic to you. I'm sure in all of those experiences, there were all kinds of expectations out there of what people thought you should or would do versus what you had to decide were yours. So talk to me about your journey with that.
Sure. So this is funny. Like I went to Wellesley College in Boston or near Boston, and
very good school.
Yes, it was. It was I was so grateful that I was able to go. So I'm at Wellesley and I have to declare my major, and I tell my parents, "Is like, I want to be a teacher," and they tell us like, "Well, then you're leaving Wellesley." And because we're not paying for it, for you to be a teacher. And it's like, you can go to a community college, and, no disrespect for any of that like this, but this was how my parents thought, not necessarily how I thought.
Yeah.
Right. But I was, I don't know, young, 19. And I was like, oh, okay. And I loved my college. I was having, I was loving my experience. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm not going to be a teacher then. So that's when the investment banks came to recruit at the college, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to be a banker.
Wow.
And so anybody that really knows me knows that like I had no business being on Wall Street, like none. I did okay, but they're like, what, so. And then eventually, not only did I become a teacher, I became a preschool teacher, which is like the lowest of the low.
It really, by cultures, when you're looking at the economic piece of it, even though it's one of the most valuable things you could do from developing little humans, but so interesting, the definition we put on that. And, going back to the Wellesley College piece, it's a list of very distinguished alumni. And so I think there's an expectation, not just from your parents, but from anybody that when you go to Wellesley, you're going to come out and you're going to just, because of its reputation, which is a blessing and a curse at the same time.
Yeah. But I think I don't think that Wellesley puts that on us.
No,
at all,
I think it's the attitude about Wellesley.
That.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, because it's an investment, it's hard, it's whatever. And, you want to have a return on that investment somehow. I think that's how my parents were thinking.
Sure.
So it takes time to have the guts to live authentically. It also takes, and sometimes you've got to do things that you don't want to do in order to get to where you want to get.
Yeah.
But as long as it's within integrity, and I think that's my North Star, right? So when I started my business, I wasn't making enough money with my business. So I had to take consulting gigs and do things that I really didn't want to do.
Sure.
But I did them, and I did them to the best of my ability, and I put my heart and soul into that. But that was a means to an end.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
That's also living authentically, because sometimes you just got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. And I think you point that it's that means to an end. It's like there's a greater purpose within this than just this job that I don't really want to be doing. It's feeding something that I really do want to be doing.
Right.
And I think if you can remember that, and when you and think about if you're doing something like that, what's the greater purpose in this? And if it's lacking, then you got to question it. But if it's not, it's your driving force.
Exactly. And I think that's where we go wrong, right? Yeah. That's where we get stuck. And we say, it's like, you start with that intention. It's like, oh, this is a means to an end. But then you kind of get comfortable and cozy, and it's not horrible. It's okay, but it's not great, but it pays the bills. And then that's when you kind of 10 years go by and you forget that it was a means to an end. And that's when you start that's when, problems start because now you're like, oh my God, like what happened? And you didn't even notice that you were just slipping into this like comfortable uncomfort kind of thing.
Just it was easy. You kind of unconsciously slipped into it because we live so much of our life unconsciously. We just kind of start going with the flow as things start happening, kids, partners, whatever it is that happens. But I think you also see a lot of midlife crises because of that.
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah, no, that's so much truth to that. So within that, how did you feel like you had to? I am the over-explaining champion of the world. So whenever I make anything, and if I think I'm going to be making a change or doing something that might get some resistance, I just keep explaining it, hoping that if I explain it up, they'll understand. When the reality is some people are going to get it and some people aren't. And that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to do what feels authentic and true, following your integrity to you. So did you feel like that as you were transitioning?
Oh, hell yeah, absolutely. And I remember, I don't remember like exactly the event that caused the light bulb to come out, but I remember I'm very different than my parents and then my mom. And my mom and I had like this very loving and contentious relationship all at once. It was very weird.
Yeah.
But but I remember the day, like I would do what I wanted to do. Like I was very stubborn and she would get mad at me for doing what I wanted to do. But it wasn't enough for me to just do what I wanted to do. I had to make sure that she understood and that she approved.
Yes. Yes. It's oh man, that is a tough place to be. And at some point you have to if you're going to have really any peace about it, you have to excuse yourself from that.
Exactly. And I feel like, it was the banging of my head again. And I'm like trying to get her approval, which she wasn't going to give it to me. Right. Because she didn't approve. So she was very much into her own integrity. That's when I realized oh, I can't have both.
Yeah.
So I have to choose. Do I want to do what I want to do or do I want her approval? Because both are not going to happen.
Yeah.
And that was like a really pivotal moment where I started living more the life that I wanted to live.
Yeah.
And with a lot of love, saying I know, I'm going to do this anyway. I know you may not approve, but I hope that you still love me for this. And of course you did, right?
Yeah, right.
But at some point you have to understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a tough road to go. But I think that's a journey that I feel like, that's something we have to kind of encounter at some point and make the choice. And it's not an easy one, but it's the right one when you know it, you feel it, and if you're going against what's authentic to you, and you have a choice. And I think sometimes people get this idea that they're stuck. You can be stuck, but that's a choice.
Exactly.
And it doesn't mean it's an easy choice, but it's a choice nonetheless. And so realizing we do have choices, we're not stuck. You just got to decide whether that choice is worth it, and within that, what it brings and the pros and cons of all of that. But removing ourselves from the stuck mindset and moving into that. And I've been there. Well, I have a choice here. I just have to decide whether I'm willing to go on that journey.
Yeah. And the thing is, you might even make the wrong choice.
Right.
Right? It doesn't mean that it's going to be right.
Yeah.
But it's still right in the sense that at least you made the choice and now you're you're driving the car versus being the passenger.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a great analogy. Accepting the layered aspects of not only ourselves, but our lives. I mean, you had a very tough experience a couple of years ago. And I think we want to embrace all of the good parts. And you even shared, difficulties and expectations with your mom. We want to embrace all the good parts, but we don't want to embrace or accept the hard parts, but we cannot live a full life and feel all the joy that comes with it without being fully open and living through all the tough stuff that comes with it. So talk to me about your layers journey.
Sure. So, my husband died I think it was 16 months ago, so it wasn't that long ago. And it was and he asked to be taken off life support, and I respected his wishes. So I feel like that is by far the hardest thing that I have ever been through. But it was from going through that experience that I started looking more into this discomfort thing. And that's when I wrote my book and yada, yada. And what I realized is that I think that we as a society put discomfort or as a negative. And I'm trying to change that. Right.
Yeah,
it's not like, oh, you can have anything, you can have this wonderful life, but you also have to have pain, ooh, that doesn't, that no, hurts.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I was like, well, maybe I don't want that great pain. I don't want that great life, because then my pain stays down here and we're good. But so what I try to break apart for myself and for others is that it's not discomfort, these really hard situations. They're there to teach you. And if you look at if you, instead of being afraid of it, if you embrace it for what it is, not only are you going to get through it faster, but you will also learn and grow your container. So
I like that.
My thesis is we all have problems, we all have challenges, but we think that they shouldn't be there. And that's the problem.
Yes. Yeah. And it's funny because I talked to, and this, you and I've talked about this episode. I'm getting, I'll be approaching 75 episodes by the end of this fall. 2 times you and Megan Locklear have been willing to have the conversation about embracing discomfort and going at it in a way of okay, how can I expand my capacity for this and acceptance of this when it happens so that I can walk through it? Because stuffing it doesn't work. Exactly. Ignoring it does not work. It will show up later in some not so great way. And that doesn't make the discomfort any less devastating or any less hard, but you can't ignore it. You can't just push that away and go on with your life and expect to be able to, because that's taking up space in your body, in your mind, in your soul. And it doesn't allow for any of the other stuff to enter. You don't have the capacity for it.
Yeah. And I think, so I feel like having gone through the experience of losing my husband kind of gives me permission to talk about this with a really unapologetic, brave face. It's it's not like I'm sitting here telling you, oh, embrace your discomfort. And I've never had a problem in my life. Right.
Right. Absolutely.
So, but my thesis is if you would have told me the day after that my husband died that, oh, but my discomfort is only a part of my greater self, I would have punched you. Right.
Oh, sure.
I'm this does not feel like a part. This, it's my life
is all encompassing.
Yes. My life was falling apart. Yeah. That's what it felt like. That's not what it was like. I couldn't access that. Right.
Sure.
And that's okay. I'm not supposed to. I have to process. But in reality, that is the truth. And to be able to accept that truth without guilt is really important.
Yeah, right? Because it's very difficult, I think, sometimes when you lose someone like that, it's there's a lot of you hear these terms, survivor's guilt, and you feel bad about being happy or smiling or enjoying your life or moving on or even meeting someone else sometimes, whatever the case may be, or enjoying your children and all these things. And it's your life isn't over. Just because that person's life ended. That was their story, but that's not your story. Now it's part of your story, and it's surely something that you have to walk out and walk through, but that isn't your story, but we feel guilty about that. There's just something within us that makes it really difficult. But I think culturally speaking too, there's a lot of judgment out there about how people should walk their life out when they've lost a loved one like that.
Yeah. And I think what helps me, and I put it in my book, like, let's say that, the moment it happens, like, it's like both of you are living, with me and my husband, like we were together for like 20 years. And he was the love of my life. Like,
yes, we
had like this magical, like, and it's not like, like rosy glasses, everything after somebody passes. Like, of course we had issues, but we lived
a life together,
and we really didn't have that many issues. But okay.
Yeah.
So when it first happens, like if your grief is a ball that's, 3 inches in diameter, right? Sure. Your life is also 3 inches in diameter because your life was all of it. Like, you were together, like, for 20 years. Like, he was my whole life.
Yeah.
But as time passes, our life together was 3 centimeters, but my life is now 4 centimeters. And then more time passes because I have more experiences and I have more time. So now, my life gets bigger, but it doesn't mean that the grief gets smaller, right? Yeah. It's just like our life together, our pain, our everything will always be that 3 centimeters. But just because time passes and, you have experiences around it grows. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful description of just all the parts of us and all the experiences we have, and embracing it and accepting all of those things as being part of who we are. Shitty stuff's going to happen. And a lot of it we don't have control over, but we do have a choice in how we walk it out and how we experience it. And I think that's where that comes in. And what a great thing for you to model to your sons. And this is, you don't have to answer this question because it's personal, but do you think they picked up on that? Has that been something that has helped you help them?
100%. And I'm super close to my sons, and we were a super close family even before my husband died.
Sure.
And we talk about it all the time, and and sometimes, but it's funny because my perception of it and their perception of it are completely different.
Oh, sure.
Because I remember we were watching a TV show, and it was the mother had passed away and the dad went crazy. And so you see him like 3 years later, and he has like this unshoveled beard, and he's walking, he's a little crazy. And then I look at my boys and I'm like, aren't you glad that I didn't go crazy? And both of them looked at me and they're like, I'm like, what?
That's so funny.
I was like, here I was thinking that I was handling it like a boss, and they're like, my mom's going crazy. So,
oh, wow. But the fact that they feel like safe saying that, I think that's so much of it too, because you see so many, when these things happen, you see so many years later where the kids grow up into adults, but they have this unprocessed trauma because they didn't feel like they had the space, or it was allowed for them to feel it, walk it out, go through what they needed to go through after that very difficult experience. So, I think that's, there's a lot to that too.
And I think a mistake that us parents do a lot, and I've been guilty of this myself, but I talk about this in the book, and I talk about this in my coaching, is that you need to let your kids go through their own things.
Yes.
Right. We can't and this was such a great example because I can't fix it. I cannot bring their dad back. So I can't just be like, oh, here, you're feeling bad, have a cookie, it's a cookie isn't going to solve this problem.
No.
So the best thing that we can do is trust them enough to give them the space to feel what they need to feel.
God, that's so
know.
powerful. And because it's hard as parents, we don't want our kids to feel bad. And so I think sometimes we've seen a generation of parents shelter themselves and their children to a point when they get out in the world, they've got no clue
Exactly.
how to solve a problem. Anything happens, they go to college, the military, a new job, whatever it is they do, they go out in the world and they're like, they don't know how to do their laundry.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, I mean, or something happens and they don't have any coping mechanism and there's just fear of failing because they've never been allowed to fail because parents thought they were saving them when actually hard stuff is part of life. Yep. And so we have to allow them to experience that when it happens, be there for them. Show up, like
support them, right? Don't fix them.
I am here for you. What resources do you need? But you cannot, you can't fix everything for them. So, I think that's such an important point of them and them feeling safe enough. Like, if I do this wrong, I've got the support system I need in place to bounce back, but I've got the permission to do the things I need to do to walk this out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Love is unconditional. Nothing else is.
Right.
But so as long as they know that there's literally nothing in the world that my sons could do that would prevent me from loving them the way that I love them. I can not agree with them.
Right.
I can be like, God, I wish you would have made a different choice, all of those things. But my love for them will never change. No matter whatever it is that they do or how horrific or whatever bad decisions they make. Yeah. They need to know that. Yeah. Right. And once they know that, it gives them permission to go and mess up, to go and try things, to fail, to make some really bad decisions that hopefully don't have these really significant consequences. But even if they did, I would still be there for them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a difference. It matters. It makes a difference in how they feel and process. And, and us modeling that to them too, and also, I think the one thing that I had to really learn is in the generation that I grew up in, and you might have had the same experience. Parents never admitted when they were wrong. It was that just didn't happen. There was no I'm sorry's. There was no ever like I didn't. I really blew up on you earlier. That was not the way I wanted to handle that situation. Please forgive me and can we start over? Whatever. That never happened. And so I was one thing I didn't do. There's a lot of things I didn't do right that they'll be in therapy for, but.
They'll be in therapy no matter what.
Well, we all need one, don't we? Oh my gosh. But I was always tried to be conscious of going back and apologizing when I didn't show up the way I wanted to, because I thought it was important for them to know that mom and dad mess up too. And mom and dad make mistakes too. And guess what? We can go back and redo and repair and go from there. So I think that's, so important. And all part of these layers, all part of these layers of who we are, accepting all that. Oh, thank you so much for that. I'm so good. So in living out feel, finding empowerment, embracing layers, how has that affected your relationship with yourself as well as your relationship with others?
Okay, so I think it's acceptance. That's how I put them together.
Yeah.
Is acceptance and understanding that you're going to get things wrong. Yes, my kids are going to be in therapy no matter what. And the thing is, we don't even know why.
So true. Yeah.
You think that that you were, but maybe you said something in the third grade that really messed them up, and I don't know. Yeah. So it's accepting that, and again, for me, is living in my value of integrity that I don't care what happens and what bad decisions they make or anybody else makes or whatever happens in the world outside of me. I know that I did the best I can. And if that was not good enough for that situation, I understand, but I couldn't do differently. I didn't know, so that's why integrity gives me so much peace, because then I can make mistakes, because they weren't on purpose. We
Right.
all make mistakes, and I can forgive myself.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll forgive me. But if you don't, that's on you, not on me.
Yeah. And that's a choice, and you can't make people do that. And I think there's also too a confidence in a repair piece too, that when you can accept yourself for who you are and accept all those layers, you can also go back and be like, okay, yeah, that happened. And now I've got the knowledge that I can go back and try and repair this situation based on what I know now that I just didn't know then.
I know it was, and that's why, again, like integrity is like my North Star, because it allows me to view life that way. Does that mean that I've always lived integrity? No, I was I was a bratty teenager. I was a drug addict. Like I did a lot of really crappy things. But, in the second part of my life, I've been sober 20 something years. I've never changed that value.
Yeah.
Whatever mistakes come and wherever the chips may fall, they will fall.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing, when you say about layers, I feel like we all have different parts of our personalities. Like there's and I'm not an expert at this at all, but I just find it fascinating that, there is the part of you that wants to rebel. There is the part of you that wants to be the good girl. There's a part of you that wants to, that's still 7 years old and acting from there. There's still the part of you that's scared. And that layering is also understanding that that all those parts are within you. Mm-hmm. But you get to choose who gets the microphone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that part of that acceptance is just being mindful of that, and conscious of that, and not stuffing things and, walk in accepting them for what they are when they show up.
Right.
Yeah. And being able to sit with that. We are down to the rapid fire. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
All right. Easy peasy. So for me, it's swimming, snowboarding, hiking, riding my bike, even though I don't ride that anymore. But more than anything is doing any of those things in nature with my boys.
Yeah. And you live in a beautiful part of the country to do all those things in too. That's so wonderful. Yeah. And then 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
Oh my gosh, I had written these down and I don't know where I went. But I want to feel in 6 months, I want to feel confident. I want to feel and confidence comes from being in my integrity. Confidence always also comes from doing difficult things. So I want to be brave. I want to face the challenges that are in front of me as gracefully as I can.
Yeah.
I want to feel peace, that regardless, I heard a saying that I kind of live by is once you know where the gold mine is, you don't have to hoard the gold. I want to live with such peace and knowledge, understanding that I don't have to worry.
Yeah.
Not sure that I'm ever going to get there, but at least that confidence that I can handle it. Yeah. And I think I had one more. I want to feel good in my body. I want to feel healthy and strong. I want to feel that I am able to do the things that I want to do, that that whatever comes is yeah, let's go. Yeah. Because I had a hip replacement before I was 50. I was 49 and I was walking on crutches because I couldn't even walk, and my life got so small.
Yeah.
And so now I want my body to keep up with my visions. So.
Yeah, that's so hard when things like that happen, because especially when you're used to being so active, that's so that can be so discouraging. So good for you for okay, got the new hip. Let's go. Let's go. Thank you so much, Cristina. This was so wonderful. Tell us about, and this will be all in our sources on our website, audience, so don't panic. You'll be able to find it. You don't need to write this down right now if you're driving in your car and listening. But tell us where we can find you, your website, your book. Just share us a little bit about that.
Sure. So the easiest thing is my website is like the hub for everything. And it's CristinaMRamirez.com.
Okay.
And there you can find my book. It's called Empowered by Discomfort. It's an Amazon's bestseller, which I'm super proud of.
Yeah.
And I've really enjoyed it, poured out of me, and I've really enjoyed that process. But you can also learn there about our different coaching programs, and, other more information about like this topic in general, growth mindset, empowerment, and facing discomfort. Because I feel like if you that's how you become confident,
Yeah.
So
if you can show up in that situation in a right and healthy way, you can show up in any situation.
Exactly.
Absolutely. All right, Cristina, thank you so much for your time today. This was so great. Audience, again, embracinglayers.com to find out all these things. We'll be sharing it on our socials as well. But I think there's so many gems and nuggets in this episode this week. So I so appreciate Cristina's time, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. And thanks so much for listening, and have a great week.
Thank you.